Yes, this is the Higher Power Radio Show. Before we get started, let's take care of a little housekeeping.
Learn the most empowering hiring techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with your host, Rick Girard.
All right, Sam is a brilliant CEO, solid vision, great brand momentum, but he is stuck and burnt out. Not because the business is failing, but because everything felt harder than it should be. Projects dragged. His team was consistently fixing things that should have never been broken. Every week brought new processes, new guardrails, new checklists, all in the name of protecting the company from more avoidable mistakes. He told me I actually spend more time building process to defend against bad decisions than I do growing the business. And that's when we realized the real problem wasn't culture or burnout or even broken systems. It was the people, the wrong people in the wrong seats. He actually had the right people in the wrong seats. And it was costing him time, talent, and traction. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest people by sharing insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs and game changers like our guest today, Zac Gregg. Now, Zac is the founder and CEO of Vital Design. He's a founder who scaled a 100-plus person agency by learning his exact lesson the hard way, kind of just like me. We're digging into how hiring misfires quietly lead to bloated team processes, team friction, and he's going to share how he's been able to kind of work on fixing it by getting ruthlessly clear about who belongs where and why, which is what makes Zac the perfect expert for today's topic. Zac, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Great to be here, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because I think most of our audience knows I get to spend time with people before and we talk about challenges. And it's funny because we all have the same challenges. I've never talked to an entrepreneur yet or somebody who's building a business who has all the right people in the right seats, which is the goal. And I find what's really common is that a lot of entrepreneurs have the right people in the wrong seats quite often. And there's a combination of those. A lot of entrepreneurs hire the wrong people in the right seat, which means that they bring the right competency and skills, but they just totally don't align with the culture. Let's talk a little bit about that. How has that manifested itself for you? Walk me through kind of your storyline, if you could.
Yeah. So I think, the conversation starts with, the place where we are constantly trying to grow the business. Been from, 2010, we had been 8 to 10 people for almost 10 years. Between 2010 and 2025, we've grown to 100 people. We've broken through ceilings that we weren't able to break through in the first 10, and they happen all the time. And I think you get the 3 different types of hitting the ceiling, right? Like you have the company's hit the ceiling. You need to really rethink about what the company's delivering, doing. You got the department is not hitting the ceiling, and you've got the person is hitting the ceiling, all of which take some real work because you don't get from hitting the ceiling to breaking through the ceiling and evolving without major hard work. This quarter, just in time for our interview, I'm sitting in an EOS meeting, hearing, we run EOS and we've got our big quarterlies, and we're sitting at the quarterly. And, as I start to notice, there's a general theme, like once to twice a year, we're spending a good amount of our quarterly meetings talking about burnout and culture issues when it pertains to employees who are feeling burnt out, and managers, especially, who are struggling to manage the burnout and manage the feelings of being overworked and unrewarded and culture evaporating as things happen. And what's crazy is we spend all this money every quarter to look at the company, and we all get excited about how are we going to grow the company? What's next? What's on the horizon? What's this? And then boom, sabotage. We're dealing with people hitting the ceiling. We're talking about individual departments hitting the ceiling, and we're seeing that we have burnout and culture issues. And that's what we're talking about instead of solving the world's problems. So that's kind of where this journey starts for me, about twice a year, every year, and over 4 years of paying an implementer to come in and help us facilitate these quarterly meetings. I'm like at the point of a little frustrated and burnt out myself of talking about burnout and culture. And I think it puts me right where every single other CEO gets as this process unfolds.
Yeah. So how does that affect your customers? I mean, is dealing with burnout and cultural friction is a real thing. Everybody deals with it from time to time, and I feel like it goes in waves, right?
For sure.
It usually like longer lag times. I don't know. How's that? Like, how are you?
Yeah, so we're a people business, right? Like, unlike a lot of people, right? We're a people business.
Yeah.
So when the only thing we offer our clients is great people, experience, skills, diligence, hard work, great communication skills. That's what we obviously great amount of experience around the services we're delivering. So all of a sudden, right? People are burnt out. There's friction. Or do those people quit? Are they as willing to help each other out as teammates? When it actually affects clients, it's usually too late and decisions have to be made. I think the reality is they may experience some attrition. The other big thing is that when somebody's spending too much time on one or two accounts, then the other accounts can get affected just from lack of attention. But I think the key thing here is that when you start with these burnout issues, when you start with cultural issues and you start thinking about it, you're like, what's wrong with our company and what's wrong with our process? And so, you're not immediately thinking you have people problems. You're generally thinking, I've got a problem. There's a problem in production planning that we haven't solved yet, or we don't have the right delivery tools, or the software you're using isn't correct, or systems and process are broken. And so that's when these meetings start to get really like, okay, what are the problems? And we start throwing stuff at the wall.
I'm glad you're parlaying in this, because what I've noticed with customers that I've worked with in the past is you end up adding lots of process, like add more process to more fuel to the fire. We got to fix this process. I do it too, right? Like I think, oh God, well, I guess I'm not strong enough process. Maybe I need to spend some time writing down this process a little bit better and defining it out so that everybody's clear on it. Then you're left with like a big book full of process, right?
Our handbook is enormous. And Rick, that's what got us through a lot of times. Like sometimes you truly are hitting the ceiling in that way where it is about process, right? Like we've figured this out in our growth. It has oftentimes been about process or systems that we didn't have that we needed to purchase, or software that we needed to purchase, or those types of things. So it can be those types of things, but you start to continue to tinker with process and systems when sometimes you don't have great people in the right seat. And you might be great people, wrong seat, or right seat, wrong people. But reality is, you start to tinker with process oftentimes at the wrong time because you think that's what solved the problem in the past. And so that's the problem with hitting the ceiling. You don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have an accountability chart problem? Do you have a systems and process problem? Or do you have a people problem? It's going to be one or the three. And people love to avoid the people problems. They love to avoid the people problems and blame everything on the things that are the resources that they don't have, rather than the resource that they have that's just not working.
I have a mentor, and his famous thing that he says is all business problems are really people problems in disguise.
Sure.
And I love that. I think it's so right. And I think when you start there, it potentially is a game changer, right?
Save you a lot of time.
Yeah, most definitely. Are you listening to the Higher Power Radio Show? I'm a host, Rick Girard. And for our podcast listeners, we'll take a quick educational moment from our sponsors.
Hey, this is William Tincup, and you should know about the You Should Know podcast. It's a topical, fun podcast with Ryan, myself, and a guest, or guests plural sometimes, and we tackle the most timely topics of the day. Give it a look, give it a listen, and subscribe. Thanks.
All right, I'm digging in deeper with our guest, Zac Gregg. He's the founder and managing partner of Vital Design. We're talking about right person, right seat, but more importantly, process. I think you had shared with me that you guys got to a point where you've got a lot of process, but then you started talking about, hey, we need to subtract some of this process. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that too often, and I'm going to spare you the story we tried to review on our last talk, but ultimately, right, when you are constantly when you're in a good growth phase, you're adding to process, you're adding to process, you're evolving. You're like, cool, this is working so well. What if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? Eventually, you hit a ceiling, and you're hitting that ceiling, and you're just not getting through. And you're adding process, and you're adding process, and you're adding process. And now you realize you probably don't have a process problem, but you've been adding process. Now you've been probably adding process for a couple of years now, 2 or 3 years now. And then all of a sudden you just keep adding process to it. And one thing that we never do is look at the subtraction of process. One of the ways this was described to me at one point is that, like, the tricycle is a great bike for a young boy. And for them, it takes them from not knowing how to ride to knowing how to ride and learning how to steer and how to pedal and do all those things. And then if you want to go a little bit faster and you want to learn how to get to a 10 speed, you're going to get a two-wheel bike with some training wheels. And then, when you hit the ceiling of that bike and you're close and you're ready to take off now you're ready for a bike. And, you're able to get eventually to this new bike that has brakes on it and gears on it and all this stuff. And it allows you to go faster. You could pedal all as fast as you want on that first version of the bike in your first handbook version. And you can pedal as hard as you want on that version of the bike. You're just never going to break the ceiling of the speed. It is never going to go over 7 miles per hour. And then your training wheel bike is never going to go over 10 miles an hour. But once you get to the next one, you're going to be able to get to 20, 30, and then you're going to maybe need a motorcycle, right?
Yeah.
The one thing, I've heard this analogy over and over again, you're going to hit ceilings and you're going to need new systems and processes. But the one thing they never did is say, just add gears and brakes and, handbrakes and gears and different types of chains and stuff to the tricycle.
Yeah, you're never going to do a wheelie on a tricycle, right?
Right. Like, so at the end of the day, one thing they do is they throw the tricycle away. You put it in a yard sale. You don't try to add to it. And one of the things that I've found as a business person here is just like the amount of stuff that we add to process. And so how does that affect? Why is this so important? Because we're trying to deliver efficiently the best work possible for the least amount of money that our clients can pay for it. That's going to keep us competitive. That's going to keep us relevant. If we can do that, well, we've got to make sure we're getting rid of process as much as we're adding to process. And it's got to be a give and a take. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was headed with that earlier.
So do you have a rule about that?
I think the rule is that we need to, whenever we are in a meeting and we add process, we say, what are we taking away? And it's a give and a take. And if it's not, sometimes we realize maybe it's not a process issue, because also in this becomes like, is process actually the problem? Are we using process? And I think this is one of the points that we're going to get to is like, what if we're going to add process? Are we adding process to protect ourselves from people who don't know how to do the job very well? So is it a training issue or is it a people issue? And so I don't want to keep adding process to dumbify something that maybe the person who isn't able to use this process efficiently doesn't need more process. Maybe they're just not the right person, or maybe they need better training. So that allows you to keep your process very streamlined and try to keep everything to a minimum amount of words or points or whatever you need, which is really what you want, is to create guardrails, not processes.
I'm glad you shared that, because I think that's a really important point. Again, creating process that maybe lowers standards and quality is not a good thing. I mean, in the fact that you're asking that question and saying, "Hey, are we doing this because we've got somebody who's not working on this role, and maybe we really need to do an exercise to kind of understand whether or not we have the right person in the right seat." Good point that we could actually that leads us into kind of like this exercise that you guys do. So tell me about your hitting the ceiling exercise, because
Yeah. So when we get here, our integrator, who's awesome, another Rick, is
he has to be awesome with the name Rick.
yeah, he's awesome. And Rick is he's just great about like running this exercise where we immediately look at the accountability chart. What about our accountability chart? Because right, sometimes it's not systems and process, and sometimes it's not actually people. Sometimes it's is that department buried and they don't have enough say, they don't have enough representation? Is it a management issue? Is it that, we used to solve the problem as all our service team, but now we have individual practice areas around industries per service? Or I had account managers as a delivery team, but now I have account executives and account managers and project managers. Or do I have all of these things need to be looked at?
Yeah.
And they can be incredibly groundbreaking when it comes to hitting through ceilings and breaking through ceilings. It just might be you might not have the right accountability chart structure. It's so tempting to go here. And what we find when it's not an accountability chart process is we ask the question like, you're the manager of this department. It's your department. What would you change here? Well, I really like how things are. I feel like that's, this is good. And I could do this, I guess, but I'm not like sure how much. And you're like, this is an accountability chart issue. Or they're like, you know what? You're right. We need to get rid of, or we're too flat. I need account executives. I need the account manager structure. I need project managers. I need them all to ladder up, and that would change everything. And you can tell by how people look at their accountability chart, whether they haven't looked at it in a while, whether they're inspired to change it, whether they think there's real success that would come from addressing accountability chart issues. So, and when we're talking about accountability chart, we're just talking about like how departments are working. So
When you talk about accountability chart, there's in EOS, there's two components. You have the accountability chart, and then you also have the people analyzer. You're hitting on something. You said something about like, you have to do the accountability chart in a way that works for you. Have you tweaked it? Because I have a secret that I'll share with you, but like, I found that there's a gap there because we run on EOS as well.
yeah,
I've had to.
I'm excited to hear your thing, but no, when we talk about the accountability chart, it's devoid of people. So we don't want to talk about people. So we're completely, it's divergent. One cannot be talked about with the other because we find ourselves saying, oh, this seat would work if we had this person in it. It's like either that seat belongs there or that seat does not belong there. We will get to the people analyzer after we determine whether the accountability chart is the correct way to run this department. And that should be based on how the leader of that department sees the best, because they're the one we're going to hold accountable long term. So does that help explain that?
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Because, I think there is a little confusion that I've talked to quite a few people where they're synonymous with each other, right? Like they use the accountability chart to determine whether or not the people, and I mean, it is closely related. So
Sure.
I'm glad you brought up the point that you separated out. So does the business need this seat is kind of what you're focusing in on for the accountability chart.
Yeah. And does this architecture, the best architecture, is this solving the problems that you need to solve? Or are you missing key functions or key management or key, or key, I would just say, structure. You rarely do you go from flat to vertical, or rarely do you go from vertical to flat. You're usually just flattening out parts of the verticality. So, we started once as an 8 to 10 person company. It was a pretty flat company. And that accountability chart has grown, hopefully, in sophistication in order to address delivery and company problems that couldn't have been solved any other way, because it's expensive to solve problems in the accountability chart unless you have a real problem there. So the people become something totally different.
So you're looking at the accountability chart how often? Every quarter?
Not often enough. Would I say whenever we're hitting a ceiling, you should look at your accountability chart. Whenever
That's
you're
where you start.
having a department that is having an issue, you should start with the accountability chart. Because once you check that box and you're done with it, you can move on to process and system and people analyzer. I just want to check the box. Like, this is your department. You keep talking about you have issues. I just want to make sure it's not a structural issue. Do you have all the people you need? Do you have all the seats you need? Okay. Check.
Do you prioritize process and systems over the people analyzer, or how do you think about that?
Yeah. So good question. I think these days, I would put people analyzer at the top and flip this thing on its head. But I think that the natural proclivity is to go to process and systems. You are hitting the ceiling. Well, first, it's hard because is this a company problem? If you say you have burnout and culture issues in your department and you ask another department, they're going to say, I have that too. And then they're going to, so all of a sudden, is this a company problem? Because if it is, you're not going to go to the people analyzer, right? So if it's a department problem, you're going to probably go to a process and systems. Man, I don't want to have to get rid of one of my people. I love my people. They're in my tribe. You got this, this is my people. So you may, again, go to process and systems. I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying this is a natural progression, is that if it's a department problem, it's going to become, if that department's hitting a ceiling, they're going to look at process and system. I need more software. I need better process. I need this because I've been doing my one-on-ones and my 555s and my people are great. And so boom, you find yourself adding to process, buying better systems, doing all those things. At some point, you have to be honest with yourself and say, do I have the right people? And that's the people analyzer aspect that you're saying is like getting in the way. And trust me, it is the place where we should start. But there are some real reasons why it doesn't go that direction.
So that's where we start, is always people analyzer, and then we work our way down. It's that thing that's been ingrained in my head that like the root of all business problems are people problems in disguise. Yeah. And, one of the things that I've had to work really hard at, it's been really hard, is getting people to be honest with, okay, it's okay that we have Joe here and he fits the culture, but is he in the right seat? We really need to have discussion about that because quite frankly, performance is down. And then the conversation needs to be had with Joe, and the manager has to be okay with, hey, you know what? I kind of hit a ceiling. Like, I'm not really doing the workout. Like, the work doesn't charge me up anymore. I'd like to move over here. Then it's kind of, okay, great. Well, let's figure out how we can get you there, and let's put together a plan to do it. And that's been my biggest struggle with getting managers to allow people to grow in a different direction. We're tribal. We want to keep people in our tribe, the people that are close to us. And the biggest hurdle that I've had with managers in my career has always been, Joe is so productive for me, and I don't know if I could do without him.
Yeah.
And so there's that natural tendency for managers almost to hold people back.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, the other big issue there, right, comes that, is Joe going to be as good of a manager if we move him into management as he was as a production?
And I can tell you from my experience, no.
Not at first. Not
unless he's been trained, man. I was a top producer, and I got promoted fairly quickly to be a manager. And I remember like 3 meetings where I thought I was going to get fired. And I'm like, but I'm producing more than everybody else. And yeah, but your people don't like working for you. And I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never been trained. And I remember my mentor saying to me, like, I can see this conversation over coffee where it was like, hey, I'm like, tell me what to do. Like, what do I need to do? And he said to me, I don't know what to tell you what to do. Just do what I would do. And I go, but you're never here. So are you saying I should take more time off?
Yeah.
And that didn't go over well. But so, that I did is I actually just enrolled myself in a community college course, Management 101, and started from there and started picking up books and reading them.
Yeah. And I think that was something that, I won't forget from our initial conversation, Rick, is, one of your big hiring core values is curiosity. right?
Yep.
And so the reason I say like not yet, because if you hired the right type of people, if they shared your core values, right, they're going to become good managers. They may not be as good of a manager as they were a C+ programmer, right? But they could definitely, if they have curiosity and you've determined through using the people analyzing the above the line, below the line exercise, you determine they want to do it, then they should have the right values and the right, that will lead them to do that job well. That said, there's a lot of different types of people out there, and not everyone ends up as a good manager. I would say that a lot of my people issues are typically not people issues, they're manager issues, right? And that's for the exact reason you just said. When you get to this point where you're saying, hey, I need a manager for this department, you typically look at the highest performer in that department because you want everyone to be like them. Say, if I can get this one person to get everyone else to produce like he was or she was, then we can get that team to a much higher level than having that person outperform everyone in their department. And are you training them? Are you resourcing them enough? Because I would say, again, this becomes an area where, going back to our original conversation, if you train people well and you give them a good training, then they need less guardrails down the road. They need less process and systems because they get it. And the handbook needs less bullet points and less outline and less bullet points to fill it out.
Do you require that before you promote somebody to a manager, you put them through some sort of training first before you kind of give them the reins there?
I wish it could, always was like that. I mean, typically, when somebody becomes a manager these days, it's because somebody's left the job and so we don't have that time. But initially, we do have manager training and we do have employee training, and then we have milestones that they need to make every quarter, from required reading to some optional stuff that they should be doing, and that comes through very evidently in the one-on-ones that we do. So we're always saying, check or minus, did you get this done this quarter? And every quarter we're filling out the books that they're supposed to be reading and the things to keep them in line with other managers there.
Zac, this is such awesome content. Thank you so much for sharing this. So we got to wrap up. What would you say would be 2 or 3 key takeaways that you can give the audience that they can plug into their business today that'll help them kind of move the ball forward?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is, rely on your core values, establish a set of core values and rely on them in the hiring process. When you hire the right people, you save yourself a lot of process. I know it's, we talk about core values all the time, but when you live them and you do hiring by them and you do reviews by them, this game gets a lot easier. I would also say that look out for the accountability chart issues and make sure check the easy stuff off first, because people problems are oftentimes the hardest types of problems to deal with. They're very cathartic. When you do deal with them, you realize it's long overdue and you should have done that faster, even if you're as good as Rick you are. But so I think making sure that you look at that accountability chart, because that's easier than process and systems. Make sure that you have the right accountability chart, make sure you have the right process and systems, but quickly also realize that when you're constantly hearing about burnout and culture issues, oftentimes it's because people don't share your core values, and your core values are being questioned within a department or by a person, and they don't see the grand plan, and they're not motivated by the same things that your team is doing. And you may have found an outliers in your midst, and from a toxicity perspective can really ruin the rest of the group. So those are my 2 things, Rick. And, also, a glass of wine takes care of a lot of problems.
I love that. Zac, thanks so much for your time and investment today. And I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way in which members of the audience can find you, find your company, and learn more?
Yeah, you can always reach out on LinkedIn. I'm Zac Gregg at LinkedIn on LinkedIn. I'm also my website, Vital Design. I'm actually the chat bot. I get every chat that comes through. It's vitaldesign.com. My face is on the chat bot, and I mean business. I may not get back to you as quickly as I say I will, but somebody will. And if you're looking for me, they'll find me. It's been great to be on here, Rick, and anybody, one of your audience who wants to reach out for any reason, find me on LinkedIn or visit my website.
Better yet, if you want to work for Zac, by the way, it's Zac, Zac, Gregg. So he's like me, unique in that way.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, I want to thank you for tuning in this week's episode of Higher Power Radio. A quick thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Girard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. After all this show, you want to continue to bring you valuable content week after week. You can check us out further at Hire, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you can drop me an email at Rick, R-A-C-K, at Intertrue, I-N-T-E-R-T-R-U.ai. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to hiring success, Rick Girard.